we get started, thank you for having me join you, and I'd be happy to help in assisting in any way I possibly can. I understood that the request was to have a joint meeting with the mayor and council in the Charter Commission.
Yeah, and I thought about that, and I in consultation with a few people I know, and then with some of the members individually, the problem with that is notification and the compliance with the Open Meetings Act. It becomes very cumbersome when we meet as two groups. We'd have to do two notices. We'd have to have, how would we conduct a meeting since the mayor would be the hierarchy, that type of thing. So what I'm going to suggest, and I guess I can let you know before the meeting since it still hasn't been discussed, but my suggestion would be to have individual counselors. There was also another thought of having the counselors write comments to us. But I thought, well, some of the counselors may not be able to express their complete thoughts in a written fashion. So in order to facilitate it, I thought, and in order to comply with open meetings, what we could do is have each counselor come at a separate time into the meeting, so that way there's no quorum. They'd appear more like to testify before the commission and give us their thoughts. And we do that for each counselor, have a slot of time for each counselor, the mayor, and we could do some more at another time and give him more time so we get everyone's perspective, and then use those comments to build something. And then when we are going to present before the council, that's when we do the joint session.
Okay.
I think that would facilitate. And the other thing is, if we were in kind of a work session, would we be able to garner everyone's complete thoughts in a group, or could we get more thought out of them individually and their own personal perspectives? And that's what
Sure.
I wanted.
Right, and you probably would get more time with each one as far as their thoughts and opinions on what changes they think need to be made. So you can very well do that, and it might be more effective that way. I don't know. Have you asked the city attorney what his thoughts were on that? Or
I haven't asked Scott yet. I had asked a couple other attorneys that I know that knew municipal law, and they kind of agreed. At first they were saying, well, will you violate the Open Meetings Act? And they all agreed, if we have them individually, no. If we have them there as a group, then we have to do the dual notices of a joint meeting.
That's correct.
And then there becomes the question of hierarchy within that system, who would lead the meeting and those type of things. So I think when we appear before the council as a commission addressing the council, then that's pretty much clear cut that it's the mayor and the council, and we're reporting as a commission to them. That's a little different. But
right, you're talking about the final draft.
Right. But in a work type session, it's a little unwieldy, and we have to really respect the Open Meetings Act, not wanting to, in order to respect and abide by the thoughts of open meetings. I think it's easier to meet with each individual counselor. And I think it'd be better than having them write stuff, because some of them may not be able to express their true feelings in a written form.
Okay.
So it's an interesting construct, but I think we'll be able to get it done. I think we're 1:35 right now. I believe we'll call the meeting to order. Darlene, it's 11:35. I officially call the meeting to order. Looking at the agenda, we'd have then roll call. You do that for us, Darlene?
Yes, sir. Commissioner Cheryl Pagaka.
Present.
Commission Vice Chair Salazar.
Present.
Commissioner Martinez.
I'm here. I made it. Barely, I made it.
Commissioner Ludi.
She said she wouldn't make it.
Please, an email that,
Judy had said that she would not be able to make today's meeting.
yes. Commissioner Einer
Present.
and Commissioner Madrid.
Present.
Very good. If you all have had a meeting to look over the agenda, it's a special meeting, so it limits our agenda items to discussion items today. Have you all had a moment to look that over? And if you had, can I have a motion to move the agenda forward, please? A motion to accept the agenda.
Motion to accept.
Do I have a second?
Second.
A motion and a second to the approval of the agenda. Those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, same sign. The agenda is approved. We'll move on to the approval of the minutes of April 1st, 2021. Have you all had a chance to review the minutes?
Yes.
Yes, sir.
Are there any corrections or additions to the minutes at this time? Are there any corrections or additions to the minutes?
No.
If there are none, can I have a motion to approve the minutes of April 1st, 2021?
I make a motion.
Can I have a second?
Second.
We have a motion and a second to approve the minutes of April 21st, 2021. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Those opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Darlene, did we have any request for public input today?
No, sir, no public input today.
So we can dispense with that item, and we can get on to the discussion items. And I had asked the clerk to appear before the commission today, County City Clerk Cassandra Frescas. And we had wanted to get some information from Cassandra, and correct me if I'm wrong, commissioners, to see if we have had any requests by the public for any revisions or to the charter or revision of the charter itself, and what the process was and what the specific items for revision were brought forth. Have there been any, Madam Clerk?
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair and commission members. Thank you for having me join your meeting this afternoon. I'm happy to help with any questions. And to answer that first question, excuse me, that first question, whether or not we've had anybody in the public have oppose a challenge or have any petition or anything like that filed. The only one that I recall is shortly after the Las Vegas voters voted our home rule charter into effect in 2010. That was March of 2010. Shortly after that, we did have 2 attorneys that were prior city attorneys that made a statement basically challenging the home rule charter, stating that it did have the 60% is what they were stating, that it was required by the voters when we actually had, I believe it was 56%. So that is the only time that we had anybody ever challenge the charter. I've never received anything in written form requesting the charter to be changed. Although we've had several questions regarding the charter for clarification, being that the charter is somewhat vague. So throughout the years, we've had that. I hope that answers your question.
With regard to a couple of questions, with regard, what happened on the challenge on the 60% threshold, not meeting the threshold? What was the result?
I don't believe it never went to district court. It never went that far, from my understanding.
We never had any kind of a judgment or a judicial opinion on that.
No, there's never a determination.
And then as far as the other questions,
Mr. Chair,
do you recall the nature of those questions? Oh, excuse me, Matt, you had something?
well, in regards to that one piece, Cassandra, you'll have to go back and check if we need more clarification, but as far as I knew, the approval of the new special charter only required 50% plus one or 51% to be approved. And I remember a couple of attorneys, Danielle and maybe somebody else, challenging the whole thing. But the attorney who represented the Charter Commission back in the day, we knew well ahead that all we needed was 50% plus one.
Right, and that's correct. We actually had 56% of the voters that voted in favor of it. But that was the only, I was getting at that was the only time I remember that there was actually a challenge by Dave Romero and Danelle Smith.
I'll go back to you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Commissioner. Madam Clerk, so on the questions that you had received, do you remember what the nature of those questions were? It was just on the vague aspects of the charter?
That's correct. And we did have some questions regarding election. So the section in the charter that refers to the election, so it was never clear and guidelines were never established by the council. I think they had a deadline of 2011, I believe is what the deadline was. So therefore, what I was doing is I would refer to using our home rule charter as well as state statute. So anything that the charter was silent on, I would go to the state statute and follow those rules. So there was some question on that. The other, I remember there may have been a few more questions regarding the recall process as well. So in that section, there's the Recall Act in state statute.
Yes.
That states that someone that is going to be recalled, an elected official that's going to be recalled, there shall be some sort of malfeasance or egregious conduct, something of that sort. And in our city charter, it does not state that. So that was one of the questions that I had is if it was ever revised, would we be able to maybe include some language in there so that in effect, an elected official would not be recalled just because a handful of people decided they did not like that person, for example.
So according to you, then that was it was referred back to the state statute as having the higher threshold to meet, and so it had to be egregious conduct or malfeasance in office.
Yes, that is correct.
Okay. Anything else that you?
Off the top of my head, let me see here. I guess what I would need to do is possibly if I could get back to you and go through my notes and take a look at some of the other sections of the charter that I have an opinion on. And I can look back in my records and see some of those other questions that the public have asked. And if I can do that, maybe at another meeting.
Excellent.
I'd be happy to do that.
I think that would be ideal. As I was saying before the meeting actually started, what I'd like to do is I'll propose it as an action item in our next meeting. But a thought had occurred to me as to how we should elicit testimony from counselors. We had the suggestion to have them write comments to us. There was a suggestion to have a joint meeting, kind of a work session with council. But in looking at a few documents, number one, the Open Meetings Act, that makes it kind of very difficult to combine both bodies. And noticing the joint sessions of both bodies. And then when we meet, there's a question as to who would preside over the session. Because would it be mayor? Would it be the commission? It's questionable. And then the other thought, in consultation with a few other individuals and a couple of attorneys that I know, they thought, well, knowing the council, would we get true comments from the councilors if they had to write them? Some of them can better express themselves verbally. And if we met in a joint session, would they feel at ease to really say what they feel? Or would they be loose enough and comfortable enough to come up with what they thought should happen? So I kind of thought about that, and I'd like to, at the next meeting, kind of propose a meeting where we would have individual counselors appear before the commission at separate times. That way we don't violate the Open Meetings Act. They would appear as a witness. They would be there basically solo, if people could watch, could comment, and we could elicit more information and more ideas from them and maybe have more thought forthcoming at that point. And then we could schedule each counselor, and then the mayor possibly was for a little bit more time. And then it was brought to my attention when I was looking through some publications by the New Mexico Municipal League and looking at the charter. There's a couple of documents that they put together in defining the Home Rule Charter Amendment, or the Act, Chapter 28. And in there, I noticed that the city clerk is mentioned heavily. And then looking at the charter, a lot of it has to do with actions by and duties of the city clerk. So I'd like to propose at the next meeting to invite the city clerk also. And then I had the opportunity to speak to Dr. Taylor yesterday with regard to another subject. But he had some ideas with respect to the administrative areas of the charter that were kind of new to me, and I hadn't really thought of them because in my review of the charter, I was looking at larger picture items, and sometimes you forget the minutiae that really have a lot to do with the workings of the city. So with that thought, maybe we need a couple of meetings with the councilors appearing individually, one with the mayor, and then another meeting eliciting thoughts from the city clerk and the city manager. I think that we give a better perspective as if we just limited to the council and mayor. Because the clerk and the city manager actually have to implement large sections of the charter. And I think we might get a better perspective that way. Matt.
Mr. Chairman, you said a lot of information there. So let me do this. Cassandra, look at this process as an opportunity to help you fix the areas of the charter that need addressing, okay? And the best way to do it is outline the issues that you had issues with or have had to deal with. I don't know why I have echo. But in other words, send us a letter in writing of all these areas, plus probably some suggestions right after each item. And then that way we can handle them, Mr. Chair, because really we're trying to make her life easier so the interpretation of the charter is easier to follow.
Point well taken, exactly.
So is that too much to ask, City Clerk Cassandra?
Not at all, Mr. Martinez. I would love to be able to do that. So I'll do something in writing then, if that is the wish of the commission, and outline all of the areas that I think need to be looked at. And I can have that ready. Is that for the next meeting, or when do you want that?
I would suggest this. I would like to have, if you can prepare something in written form to get to us prior to, I'd like that. That would, we could review it, and then we could have questions for when you would like to appear before us. And that way we could get some feedback and ask you questions of the specific areas that you have indicated. So that gives us a time to really discuss those items and get real perspective from you on them. This is an opportunity to change things so that we can have a city that functions in a more professional manner, if you will, for lack of a better term. That might not be the proper term, but we'll use that. But I think I'd appreciate it if you had that opportunity to do that. That would be wonderful. Matt.
Mr. Chair, one more item. Cassandra, you talked a little bit about referring back to the state code, okay? And also that would be a recommendation. If you ran into an area where that's better, done that way, we need to know that as well.
Very well. I really appreciate, Mr. Chair and Commissioners, that you're including me in this process, because there has been a lot of issues with the charter. I mean, it is a good working document, but it is a working document that needs some work on. So I really appreciate that I can give my input. So I will get that prepared and outline with my recommendations and my opinions, and I'll get that to you as soon as I can. And then thereafter, you can let me know when you would like me to join you in the meeting, if that will work for you.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. We appreciate your presence at the commission meeting today, and I would appreciate your written comments, and then we will schedule a time for you to ask some questions and answer some questions by the commission.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I appreciate you having me here.
Thank you very much. With that, our next item on today's agenda would be our continued review of Article 2 of the Charter. We had some good thought at the last meeting. We started some lively conversation. I'd like to continue that, because I think this is going to be one of the, if you would, more contentious issues that we take on.
Mr. Chair.
Mr. Einer, Commissioner Einer, excuse me.
Sorry, I've either works well. There's something.
Einer works well or either works well?
Either works well, Einer works well. Just don't call me late for dinner. Something as we go forward in reviewing these things that really I think our city clerk was touching on and you were touching on, is that the city charter has areas, I won't say areas of ambiguity, but there's areas of city government that are not exhaustively defined by the city charter. And that, I think, is anticipated, and to a degree the intent of the city charter. But much like the U.S. Constitution has to be fleshed out by regulation and ordinance, the city charter is not a standalone. It needs to be fleshed out by regulation and ordinance, and to really take a look and say, are we getting it done in this area of city government? Requires that we look at the charter and then look at ordinance and say, well, if it's not defined, is it defined in ordinance, what we need to have in place? And we'll see that as we go through the charter, that over and over again, the council is defined with developing the ordinance that gives additional structure to city government. Sorry, that was long-winded. I apologize.
No, point well taken, Lee. I think that that's one of the areas, as we go through the rest of the review of the rest of the charter, there's areas that are going to stick out. And I've been, in my conversations with other city officials, excuse me, employees and citizens, they point to areas of the charter that are kind of ambiguous and vague. And it's in our purview to review and then to add definition by perhaps saying, well, this is, and then defining where it is better defined in ordinance or by council action or some other method. And it's in a living document, you'll find that as we kind of evolve, you're going to have different interpretations in different meetings, and then it's going to take on a whole different aspect as we evolve in the city. So being a living document, that's part of the process. And I think you point out a good piece is that as we get into it and become more sophisticated and people use the document, they're going to find that there's areas that there's questions on, or they have that aren't well defined. And I think that you point that out very succinctly, and I appreciate the comments. With that, let's continue on with Article 2 of the governing body. And if you look at that, we have 8 sections: corporate authority, powers and duties, qualification and election of councilors, council redistricting, vacancy in office, compensation, governing body procedures, and ordinances. In my first review of this, when I looked at the first section, it seemed fine to me. It was really pro forma. It defines the type of government we have, which is fine. I don't see any changes there. I don't perceive of any changes there. Perhaps my fellow commissioners do. In section A, in subsection A, and in section B, it provides where we get to the first question. The corporate authority of the city shall be vested in the governing body, which shall consist of 4 city councilors elected by district, comprising collectively the city council and a mayor, who shall be presiding officer of the governing body. I think that from my conversations with both citizens, with other commissioners, looking at the historical nature of the council since the last review, this is where a major problem lies. And this is my perspective. It seems like the last 2 mayors, and as former mayor and councilor, Commissioner Martinez pointed out, you know, when he was mayor, he had 2 votes possibly in his term to break a tie. Then we had the revisions to the charter and the reduction of the number of councilors. So now we have 4 councilors and 1 mayor. And historically, if we look back at the last 2 prior administrations, we had mayors that were very adept at usurping the council in some respect by causing friction with the council so that there would be a 2-2 tie and having the mayor cast the deciding vote. Both prior administrations on almost every vote. I think that is basically kind of distorting the intentions of the charter. The original charter was meant so that the mayor would have at times a vote, as in the case of mayor, when Matt was mayor, but not on every issue. And that could lead to problems, as we saw in the last administration, where it got the mayor in trouble by casting a deciding vote on a personal issue. We know that on the previous administration, prior to Tonita's administration, when Alfonso was mayor, there was some questions about some votes that he did that he was able to benefit for by casting a deciding vote. It goes into a couple of other areas, ethics and those type of things, but without getting ahead of ourselves there, it seems to me that the real way to avoid that is to avoid a tie of vote in the council. How do we do that? Lee? Commissioner Reiner?
It's a mathematical question. The smaller the even number of counselors, the fewer the possible outcomes that don't go to a tie. And what I mean is if you have 4, you either have unanimous one way or another, or you have 3 and 1 one way or another, or you have a tie. If you go to 8, there's a much larger number of possible non-tie votes. And therefore, effectively, as you say, the mayor has far fewer opportunities to be the tiebreaker. I agree with you, if I can speak bluntly. We saw this particularly with Alfonso's administration, that he was effectively the emperor of Las Vegas. I mean, it was just almost always a 2-2 split with him calling the shots. And I don't think that's the intent of the charter either.
Well, even if we go beyond before Alfonso and Scrules's tenure and Mayor Ortiz, there was questions that were brought forth during Mayor Marcus's tenure when they had more. He was able to basically fractionalize even a larger number of councilors. And we have, in the last few years, got from 8 to 6 to 4 councilors. And basically, it was the thought of the citizens that they didn't want to pay councilors any more money. And really, it brought the question to a head was not the time votes, but there was a group of councilors at one time that wanted to raise their level of compensation, which is in a different section of Article 2, to match that of the county commission. And that raised the hackle of every citizen in the city and say, we're not going to pay these guys anymore. We'll just redo the charter, and that started the whole thing. So there is a thought of too many commissioners, then you start affecting budgets. Even though it's minuscule, there's always that factor that's going to say, we're paying too much for counselors. We can go either we're paying too much or we're paying too little by having minimum counselors and not getting anything done, and then running the risk of having the executive branch take over the legislative branch. And I use that because we don't have an executive branch and legislative branch. That's the closest thing for discussion purposes that we have. So with that, and you mentioned 8, that would be 2 counselors for each ward. Which is pretty simple to do. Commissioner Martinez.
Francisco, both you and Lee are correct. The 4th counselors was done only because of financial reasons. There was nothing else tied to it. 8, like Lee pointed out, it's all mathematics. The opportunity to not have a vote of a mayor vote increases by the number of councilors that there is. I would say, and I preferred 8 myself. And there was a number of reasons that I preferred 8. Number one, you had a counselor from each district. Let's just say you had an issue in your district, but you didn't get one counselor, okay? But you still wanted your issue to be considered or addressed or be looked at. You could always go to the other counselor. And then you let the other counselor communicate with the rest of the council so you could get some of those things done. But here's where I think an attorney like Randy Van Vleck would be helpful for a commission like ours. Because when you start looking at numbers, okay, and it really depends on the form of government. A home rule charter is one thing, but Las Vegas has a mayor, council, manager form of government, okay? You may not say that, but at the end of the day, that's what we have. Now, take for example, the city of Albuquerque. The mayor operates pretty much like the president of the United States. The legislative body elects their own president. They do all their own work and their legislation. The approved stuff goes to the mayor for either approval or a veto, one way or the other, okay? And that's all that the mayor can do in Albuquerque. In other cities, like it's county commission / city council, I think there, maybe even Los Alamos, where everyone's voted in as a commissioner. And then the commissioners vote the mayor. So, like I said, it's very helpful to understand from a person like Randy and Clerk, who's worked with the different types of governments that are out there, to really help us determine the route we want to take. In consideration of everything, the last commission, before we made the charter change, we looked at each one of them, okay? And we didn't want to do the process because don't forget, the way Las Vegas became 8 councilors, 4 came from the town, 4 came from the city. And that's how the council was put together, and there was 1 mayor elected for the whole town, 2 councilors per district. And at one time, you sort of ran at large. In the 80s, some point, you had to run in your district. That became sort of the rule. I think it was 84, 85, 86. You had to represent the district you lived in. You couldn't be an at large anymore. But, as we look at those numbers, I think 6 is an improvement. Personally, I think 8's the best number. And you still have the role of the mayor, but you still have, like Lee talked about earlier, you have all those different options. 5 votes, 4 votes, 3 votes, the whole nine yards. There's a whole gamut of different possibilities where you don't make it the markup set up in a way that the mayor has to break the tie. And Tony Marquez was really one of the first to utilize the position of having a 2-2 council. And literally at one of the council meetings, Morris Madrid will tell you, the mayor switched horses from the 2 councilors he'd been working with to the other 2 councilors, which included Morris and Crucito. And it was all over the what do you call it, Grand Avenue and all those roundabouts that were going to be all over the place. And at that meeting at middle school, where they had that meeting, literally the mayor, and literally guess what happened? All the votes were the other 2, and they all became Morris and Crucito moving forward from that point forward. So that's how this is how drastic having only 4 councilors can be.
Point well taken, Matt. And you bring up a couple of interesting points. Mr. Anna, I see your hand. But I again, it really goes back to probability in the study of mathematics as to how you're going to break the odds and who's going to vote for who and that type of thing. But we have to look at what would be the least present, not essentially eliminating the mayor's vote, but having minimized the possibility for a vote. So that's another thing you have to think about. Commissioner Einstein.
Yes, I wanted to make the case for 8 as opposed or as separate from 6. Based on practicality, we can go to 8 with our 4 wards and have proportional representation. If we try to do 6, we've got to redesign our ward system, and we're going to be trying to do that, in a year when we also have redistricting, which is a provision of the charter we haven't touched on yet, but the pandemic has delayed the federal census. But as soon as we get the results, we need to have a board in place, and we need to be revisiting our existing wards to assure that the representation is still proportional. And trying to go somehow to a 3 or a 6 ward system, which is what we need for 6 counselors, would be a lot to have on the plate at one time.
That's agreed, but the other way to look at it would be, and I'm just going to play the devil's advocate. I'm not going to advocate for this. Well, what about then, if we're going to go through redistricting, going to 3 council districts with 2 each? There's that way to look at 6. It's also been brought to my, asked of me, well, what about keeping 4, going to 5, and having 1, or possibly going to 6 and having 2 at large? That's I think that's not right, because you could possibly have two counselors, one at large, from one district that's going to represent the ideas of a district and not truly of the city. So you'd be skewing more power to one area of the city if you had at large, or possibly two. You got, and with the possibility of three, even if you had 4 council districts and 2 at large, you could possibly have 3 councilors elected from one area, who would definitely be detrimental for the whole community. So I think that and an at-large, since the one person, one vote edict by the Supreme Court it was in the 80s, we can't have at-large districts, because it has to be representative of a one person, one vote based on equality in population. So that's why they went to districts instead of at-large members. I'll give you my Commissioner Salazar.
As we go through this process and we're considering all these options for the number of city council members, we should keep in the back of our mind that we need to think about implementation. If it's going to be too hard, the public isn't going to go for it. We need to do our work here that paves the way for an easy transition into whatever number we go with. I just wanted to put that in your heads.
And you raise a valid point, because whatever we do has to be approved by the voters, by the electorate. And if we keep it simple, then the chances of it actually being moved forward by the electorate are much greater. Much less the council. If it's too complex, it reflects on the council also, and we have to respect the councilors that may want to stand for re-election. Is it going to hurt them if they do anything, if they propose anything? They'd be then, if they surmise that it would hurt their possibilities of election, they would probably kill any recommendation we would bring forward. Commissioner Madrid.
Yes, sir.
I'd like to hear your perspectives. What do you think?
I'm really listening and learning. I understand. I think representation is crucial. I like the idea of 2 per ward, because then that represents the people there. But you talked about the census. Is that conflicting with what we're trying to do here? Is it going to conflict?
Actually not. It depends on what we do. So if we, because of the delay in the census numbers, when the census numbers are released, then it triggers a calendar to redistrict the city. We are kind of in that calendar, because we've got to bring whatever recommendations we have to the council. They have to approve it and then put it on the next ballot for approval. If the city delays until after that ballot for redistricting, and because of the delay, they may be able to, then they could redistrict right after that and we could have an election. But it depends. I'm of the mind that simplicity, I like 8, but at the very least, I would advocate if we can't get 8 through, and I think 8 would be an easy thing to do, would keep 2 in each district. When they redistrict, we just add other members. It would be a matter of figuring out when they run for re-election. That would be the thing that would give Cassandra fits. When do we have them? If we're going to get 4 new counselors, when are they going to run? We can't have them run with 2 others and have 6 people running at once. But we'd have to have maybe a staggered election, like some would be for 2 years and some would be for 4 or whatever. That's up to the council. But I'd like to advocate another thought is, what about 5? If we added a 5th, that would lessen the number of chances for a tie, because you'd have 3-2 on any issue. 3-2 4-1 or 5, that would really lessen the chances of the mayor having a vote or breaking a vote or interceding on a personal issue. What it does though is then we'd have to wait till after redistricting to redistrict and comprise a district. How do you do it so there would be representative? And I envisioned kind of a centralized district so that all the others would feed into it, kind of a spoke type thing. And that person would have to then negotiate with other districts. And that would be really for the benefit of the city at large. But that's just my thought. I think that one of the simplest ways of doing it would be the addition of 1 extra councilor and go for 8. I kind of agree with that. But that's a thought. And we don't know what we do here today is a discussion as to this particular article. So I think we're all in agreement, and I gather, that we have to increase the number of councilors. I haven't heard anything contrary to that.
Agreed.
Commissioner Martinez.
Well, you're not going to believe this, but I can remember from the last commission, we actually, the community, remember where it was, but they had 5 city councilors. And for some unknown reason, the councilors that were working with the mayor would intentionally be absent of the meeting. And they were rotating, okay? So literally what it boiled down at the end of the day, 2-2 vote again. It was too close for the 2-2 vote. So it gave back the authority for the breaking of the tie because one of them, for whatever reason, with an excused absence, would miss for an extended period of time. They kept rotating till they got what they wanted. And that's how they were able to get it done.
You're on mute.
Sorry. But thinking about that along those same lines, you could have a counselor take a walk on a boat. You could have a counselor meet or be absent to avoid a vote. You could have a coalition of 2 councilors and the mayor, as Matt indicated, do a lot of stuff. So 5 has its problems. One of the other things I did is I went through a list of the municipalities in New Mexico. Excuse me. And I looked at every one that had a home rule charter. And there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 cities out of the, 188 cities or communities that have a home rule. And some of them have mayor and council. And so I did a little homework. So Alamogordo has a home rule, and they have a manager commission style government with 7 city commissioners. Albuquerque, of course, has a mayor council with 9 councilors and a mayor. Clovis has a commissioner manager with 4 districts, 4 commissioners, 2 from each district. So there's 2 districts. Gallup has a mayor council with 4 councilors. Grants has a mayor council with 4 councilors. Hobbs has a manager with 6 commissioners. Las Cruces has a council manager with 6 councilors. Of course, Las Vegas has a mayor council with 4 councilors. Los Alamos has it's a city council government, county government with 7 members at large. Rio Rancho has a mayor council with 6 councilors. Santa Fe has a mayor and councilor with 8 councilors, 4 districts, 2 from each district. Silver City has a mayor council with 4 councilors, and that's it. So we would be within reason to have 8 councilors. But it was interesting when I looked at that, there's a number of people that have 4, number of cities that have 4. But largely they are commission managed cities, which makes it that the mayor is basically only a figurehead. He's only there for is an honorable position and only there for to bring forth the honor of the city. Commissioner Imes.
Oh. There's a benefit to a higher number of commissioners that actually has nothing to do with the balance of power between mayor and council. And that is simply the lower you go in numbers, the higher the likelihood of groupthink. And groupthink is simply a number of people with the same perspectives and the same opinions and the same worldview, not generating any new ideas, because where are they going to get them from, right? More opinions, better decisions. And in fact, there are some bodies, not in the United States typically, where if all of the governing members are in complete agreement out of the starting gate, they will designate one from their midst to take the opposing side and argue against them just so they can hear the opposing argument. I think that's a strong argument for going 4 to 8.
Point well taken. And I too have done some studies on that where I did learn that the group type activity led to more discourse, further thought, and more move the community forward in a much better fashion than a lower number of councilors who tended to be more territorial in their pursuit of funding and everything else. My council district, mine, whereas 8, they had to be more city-centric. And if we look back historically, when Vegas was at, I say peak in the last 20 years, it's when we had 8 councils, because we had more of a community thought than more of a commission or a councilor district thought. So you're right, Commissioner Ryan. So with that, within the corporate authority in section B then, if we were to bring forth the recommendation, am I hearing that we would be tending toward a recommendation for 8 councilors?
Yes.
I'd say yes.
Could I have that in the form of a motion to recommend that we amend section 2.01 subsection B? The corporate authority of the city shall be vested in the governing body, which shall consist of 8 city councilors. That we would amend that to 8.
And 2 would represent each district.
Elected by district, 2 per district.
I so move.
I second.
There's a motion on the floor and a second. Is there further discussion on this? Commissioner Salazar.
Commissioner Ludi is not here. I was wondering if we could wait till she is present to follow through with this motion.
Do I take that? Is that a motion to table?
Yes, sir.
Do I have a second table until Commissioner Ludi is present?
I'll second.
With that, I have a motion to table with a second. There being no need for a vote on the table, we will table the item and bring it up when Commissioner Salazar would remove it from the table back for either ratification. That's what's standing. That was quick order. Moving on. The powers and duties in section 2.02. I don't see any major revisions in that. Have any of you counselors, the commissioners reviewed section 2.02 powers and duties and seen any glaring recommendations coming out of there?
It's pretty standard, I think.
I think it's pretty pro forma also. Commissioners?
Mr. Chair?
Commissioner Martinez?
Yes, unfortunately, I didn't bring none of my notes with me. I had to leave early this morning. So I traveled out of state and got to my destination just about 20 minutes before the meeting. Did bring my laptop so that I could join the meeting. So I can't remember. I know I had notes, but I would imagine that if we were to keep moving forward and there's a glaring item, we should be able to go back and review it, wouldn't we?
Most definitely. If there's no action on the item, what we can do is we can defer action. As in section 2.1, we had a clear thought on that. We moved for a vote, but we moved to table till we had a quorum. As in any item, if someone wants to defer on that and return to it without a table, we can certainly do that. And if that's the wishes of the commission, we can revisit section 2.02. What's the wishes of the commission?
Well, I'd like to have Matt's information, so I think it'd be good to wait to see what he has down.
Excellent.
And I apologize, commissioners, that I had to leave sort of abruptly. I did the press conference for the city last night over the air, over the radio. Went to Albuquerque, packed up, and I'm in Lubbock right now. So it was sort of more than I expected, but nonetheless, here I am, and I wanted to make sure and join the meeting. So, and I apologize for not having my notes in front of me. And I don't want to have Darlene put it up on the screen, because then after a while it's sort of hard to track depending how big each one of our computer screens is.
Well, now that you've gone interstate, I hope you have your COVID vaccine. But,
I do.
very good. But that being said, no, that's reasonable to revisit. I think we can revisit if we can move forward. I just want to see as far as we can get. If we have to revisit, I think that's fine. I think that gives us all time to digest things and think about things and come back to them at a time that we're more comfortable and either do research or you've given it some due diligence. With that, section 2.03, and if you feel that way, Matt, if you've gone through this, I think that the major thing within section 2 here was that number of counselors. I don't see very much else in here in Article 2. I'm going back to my notes. We might want to visit with compensation. Now here's a question. Here's where the implications of moving to 8 counselors go. If we left the compensation at $10,000, currently that's $40,000. It's 4 counselors at 10, $40,000 per year. That's not an unreasonable amount. Saves the city money. If we double, we're going to go to 80,000. Which doubles that cost within the city budget and within those line items for compensation. Is that reasonable?
In my mind, it would be, Mr. Chair. Let me also add one more thing. In regard to changing the form of government, where you would weaken the mayor, okay? For example, I just thought of this now. If you weaken the powers of the mayor, that creates an almost impossible opportunity for the current mayor to want to support that. Why would he the council agenda if, the next time he runs for reelection, he's going to have less power. So those are the kind of things you have to think about as you go through this process of visiting with the mayor, visiting with councilors, visiting with the city manager and the city clerk. Everybody has a little bit of a stake in this. And you sort of have to tiptoe, the committee does, the commission does, to make sure that we take everybody's environment into consideration as we move forward. So I'm sort of glad that we're not talking about different form of government, which I think we should all get educated on it in case we're asked. But at the end of the day, you're never going to want to present something like that to a mayor, weaken his powers moving forward.
And effectively, I think that effectively, by increasing the number of councilmen, are we affecting his powers, or are we just affecting the chance of voting? I mean, he still has the power to intercede in other fashions. Are we actually diluting his power base? And that's the question we have to ask. By effectively limiting his chance for voting, what's the effect of limiting power? What does that have? And you might, from your perspective as a former mayor, what would that do?
Matt, you're on mute.
Okay. I guess I was waiting for Lee to say something, but nonetheless, there is an impact. Because now you're having to deal with 8 personalities. You're having to deal with, making sure that everybody's got all the information they have to make the best decision. And then if you had an idea that you wanted the council to consider, you need to make sure that you've done your due diligence and talked to the councilors individually. I used to think that the number of councilors made it easier to compromise myself. Now you say the word compromise and everybody sort of looks at you like, what are you talking about? There's no compromise anymore. Either we win or we don't. It's important that we compromise. If we're not able to do 2 miles of pavement on one district, maybe we do 2 miles throughout the community. Those are the kind of things that you have to leave up to the council to deliberate so that they can find a comfortable meeting. But when you have a mayor that makes all the decisions, you have to make sure that you're siding with the right 2 personalities, 2 councilors, and the mayor to get what your agenda is or isn't. So it really creates what I consider an environment to compromise, to learn to work together. We don't want 10 blocks of sidewalks. Let's go ahead and do 3 in this district. That district needs it more right now. Let's do the other 6. It's a wants and needs type thing. But I really believe that the more counselors I worked with, the easier it was to compromise. And sometimes I just got out of the way and let them decide on their own. Why? I represented the whole town. And they represented their districts, and it was easier for them to work some of these things out. I really think he has a hot iron here. 8 is the magic number for our little town.
You're on,
Matt. Commissioner Einer.
Yes. First of all, this is a matter of framing. Before we go 4 to 8, the mayor has the power to break a tie. After we go 4 to 8, the mayor has the power to break a tie. We're not taking power away from the mayor, at least not power that is ceded by the city charter. What we're doing is making it perhaps a little more difficult to game the system and how would I frame it? To exert power by a passive means that one should not possess in the first place. So I don't see this as taking power away from the mayor at all. I see it as creating an environment where better decisions are made, and the mayor can do what he does, which is preside over meetings and break ties on those odd occasions where the councilors can't come to one mind on the subject.
And it comes down to the political will and the political savvy of a mayor being able to bring forth those items that he wants to move forward by forming coalitions and forming alliances with councilors and building consensus amongst councilors on any one typical item. As you say, we're not eliminating power, we're eliminating the chance of gaming the system for personal gain. And that's what we want to do here. That's the effectiveness. One of the things that we have is kind of in our favor is we have a pretty cohesive council that has expressed its authority. So the mayor has been limited. I think he's had a couple votes, but not anything to the extent that during the previous two mayors had, who, as I said, almost literally on every vote had a vote. That's not working in the spirit of the charge. But I think the other thing we have is, besides the council that would pass this, and if it's unanimous, I mean, the mayor has to live with it. Or the other thing we have is by having more people watch these, our proceedings, and going on perhaps your radio station, Matt, and perhaps the other radio station and the newspaper, and advertising to the people what the intent is. Now, if a mayor went contrary to citizen intent, that would go negative for him on the election also. And we don't want to play politics with this. That's not our mission here. It's just to provide recommendations to move the city forward in a fashion and to revise the charter in order to advance the city. And I think if we keep couching that in those terms, and as Leah said, framing it in those terms, I think we have the bully pulpit behind us. But we're going to have to do it exactly in that fashion. Go ahead, Commissioner.
One other thing that I think we sometimes forget, especially after we look at all of these recommendations, okay? At the end of the day, the citizens have more say. The citizens have more say when there's more representatives on a council, on a commission, in the legislature. The citizens have more of a say. The time you start reducing the number of councilors, commissioners, you're getting closer to the number of one, we get closer to dictatorship, okay? So really, the citizens are the ones that are going to benefit the most. Why? Because if they don't like the councilor, they'll talk to that one. And they'll talk to the other councilor they get along with, and the other councilor they get along with. It's all about personalities. It's all about the interest. Maybe even our councilors have the same issue that the citizens bring. So the chances of you being represented by your own constituency increases when you have more of them representing you. So the citizens actually win in this case. Because why? Because they have more opportunity to get to the decision makers. And that's bottom line, you can't beat that.
Councilman or excuse me, Commissioner.
It all works. There's another selling point that I think if we want to move this forward, we have to make. We're a very poor community here, and when you say we're going 4 to 8 and they're getting 10,000 a year in bennies, that's a big number in the mind of some, but it has to be contextualized in terms of municipality with, I'm going to guess, correct me if I'm wrong, Matt, 60 million a year budget, más o menos?
Well, and I think the general fund's smaller, but the enterprise funds are huge, okay? Not too many cities have a natural gas company, a water department. You know, some of these cities don't have. I'll bet you the home rules that Francisco went through, very few have 4 enterprise funds. Most of them will have a store department, and some of them will have a solid waste department, not all. There's just a lot of revenue that comes into the city because it's not just the government. It's 4 huge enterprise funds.
Right. And so from that, we have to ask, what is the price tag we hang on a single bad decision? A couple of administrations ago, this is controversial, but we entered into an agreement to buy $12 million worth of water storage and some water along with it. And thankfully, we were able to reduce that to 4 because it turned out we were buying an enormous amount of water storage that, based on our water rights and how much flows down the Guyanas, we can never fill up. So we need to realize that the money that we save by having 4 counselors, if that results in one large bad decision, we blow enough money to have paid them for the next 20 years.
Points well taken. And along with that, along that same thread as Commissioner Einer, more counselors perhaps would afford more forethought and more thought on any particular item to avoid those bad decisions by fewer counselors. The more people, the more brain power you have. So collectively, you'd have more of a thought process involved than you do with a lesser number of counselors. And then from a council perspective, there's a lot of weight on counselors' shoulders. Right now, we have 4 that are carrying the burden of the complete city on their shoulders, and so they get pulled every which way. Sharing that responsibility with another counselor within your district or another counselor within the city relieves some of that pressure, both politically at the city level and at the district level from each counselor. You have to appreciate that they get some help here. And what does that come at? That comes at the cost of $10,000 plus. And it's $10,000 plus because there's benefits that are associated with that. I believe that within that, and correct me if I'm wrong, Matt, they get $10,000 plus, I think, some benefits, if I'm correct.
And I'm not too sure what benefits, because I think once you you qualify for retirement under the state system. I can't remember which one. Yeah, imagine this. I made $750 a month when I was mayor. And as a city councilor, $125 a month. So I've been in both roles. And if you ask me, I was a councilor for 4 years and a mayor for 2. There's actually more authority on the city council. And because of the way the last few administrations have been, everybody thinks the mayor's in charge, but it's really the governing body. The governing body has the strength, has the stroke, whatever it's called, the governing body. I'll guarantee you, Lee, if those decisions would have been 3-1 for those 2 administrations, they would have tuned the mayor up pretty quick. But it didn't happen because it was always 2-2. The mayor became a dictator and it was over. I mean, you really need to be open. And the 4 counselors was not the right prescription for Las Vegas. It was only done for financial reasons. And in the long run, look what it did. You're right, Lee. How much is a bad decision worth? I'll guarantee you, not $10,000 a counselor, way more. And there have been issues with housing. There have been issues with water. There have been issues on lawsuits. You know what I mean? The thing goes on and on, the bad decisions that have been made and that are just thrown on the laps of the next administration coming in. It's hard. And then one of the biggest things is that we changed the term of mayor. Don't forget, not too long ago, the term for mayor was 2 years. So that means new mayor, new manager, new administration. The next election was different. New mayor, new manager, new administration. It was a revolving door. There's no continuity. There's no, there's nobody in the back supporting the structure because they were changed out 2 years ago, 4 years ago. You have to have some stability in state government. And then I would look at other communities and say, that manager's been there how many years? Under how many mayors? Why? Because it's not about the politics. It's about the community. And that's why we made the change from a 2-year term for mayor and try to give it some longevity so that there could be some stability at City Hall. Because if not, it would be a revolving door. So I'm sorry that I'm going into this, whole other lecture of stuff, but I feel that it's all relevant.
No, these points are very well taken. I think that they give us a perspective, on what the impact of councilmen and council persons are in a community. This is a lively and good discussion because we brought up things that personally I had set aside or had not given a lot of thought to. I appreciate everyone's perspective because as Commissioner Madrid said, I'm learning a lot from this process also. But I think that we have to consider all aspects as we're doing whenever we consider changes to this charter. The charter is a living document that's supposed to be changed to advance a community. When they did the last one, it kind of set the community back. That's not the spirit of a charter, and it's not the spirit of a living document. But with that, again, I'll go back to my question. Do you feel that one of the other thoughts that has been occurred to me, if the council, and I'll tell you where it comes from, it's from an old professor of mine, and all of you probably know him, Dr. Marvilio Vigil, who is the Dean of Municipal Law and State Law. In my conversations with him, when they changed the charter, he always used to say, I remember his words vividly. He said, "Esos pendejos, they shouldn't have done that. They could have changed this by just setting an ordinance that capped the compensation for the counselors at half of what the commissioners made. They didn't have to change the charter. It was fine. They just had to, by ordinance, in the body, change the compensation to half of that of the commission. That would have given them a raise, and it would have ended the conversation." But I take those words to heart. What about that? $10,000 is pretty arbitrary, and it's pretty low in today's economy. Would setting make a recommendation to set the compensation at half of whatever the prevailing rate is for county commissioners? So I believe right now it's $24,000 a year. So that would cap the councilmen at $12,000, narrowing the gap somewhat between mayor and council, giving councilmen a raise because they do a lot. But if we did that for 8, we're going from 80,000 to adding 2,000 more, 88,000. So it's not that much, but it does give a target. So if they move the commission up, they would get a raise. Thoughts on that? Don't be shy.
I just, working as many things that I did, it was never for the money. It's not there for the money. And, I understand that's part of it, and they do a lot of work. I just don't think, if they're going to run, then they need to know that this is the amount that you're going to get. And if you don't want to run, then don't run. Again, it's not for the money. It's for what you're going to do for the people that you're representing.
So your take would be that it's more for the service of the community and not the compensation.
Right.
Excellent. Commissioner Salazar, you had your.
Yes. Do you know off the top of your head how often the county commission increases their salaries?
Well, it's not increasing their salaries. There's a formula in the state. It's set by state statute. It's based on valuation.
Oh.
If the valuation in a county goes up, if property valuation goes up, then they would get an increase, because basically, if a commission came in and did things like attracting industry and attracting population and that type of thing, where the value of property would go up, then it's attached to that increase in valuation. So in other words, if the commission does their job and they raise valuation, then they would get a raise. Now that would be an incentive here also, because it would raise, if we could raise valuation at the city level, it would raise valuation at the county level, giving the commissioners a raise, and then thereby giving the councilors a raise. So there's an incentive based in here that they have to do work to get a raise. Now, there are times that if the valuation doesn't go up, it's been set through legislative action to raise it, but its thought is based in the valuation. Commissioner Madrid.
By the same token, if valuation goes down, is that impacted on the?
No, it would remain dormant or level.
Okay,
So you can't decrease, but you can't go up.
okay.
But that was a thought. I thought that was an interesting approach to it, based on valuation. In other words, the incentive is raise the value of the community, you raise your salary.
Well, that makes sense to me. It makes,
Yeah, there's upsides and downsides to that, and I would say that the downside would be it incentivizes gentrification, which do we want to see that? But I'm not enthused about it. But I really kind of had a question for Matt Martinez, which is, how many hours per week would you say that a councilman spends actively engaged in his role as a councilman?
That has changed, Lee, through the years. I guess the perfect model for a good city councilor to work for the citizens is for those councilors to operate on the committee system, okay? I don't know where committees are anymore, because committees were a big part of my administration and the administrations during that whole era, okay? So if councilors weren't meeting at a council meeting or at a work session, they were meeting on commission meetings. They had their meetings going on in different departments. Utilities had a big committee, public safety had a committee, economic development had their own committee. So councilors were per se not just going to council meetings to get paid. They were attending all of these committee meetings, okay? As a councilor myself, I think I was on 6 committees and I chaired 2 of them. And we were at least meeting once a month. So what would happen is the committees would meet, for example, utilities. They would make the recommendations to the city council at the work session. The city council would review all of the minutia tied to the item. And then by the time we got that item approved there, we would move it to the city council meeting where it was more ceremonial, okay? So I would say back when I was a councilor, back from 86 to 1990, I was at least doing 10 hours a week. And I want to say the least council or had maybe 2 committees, maybe they were doing 6 hours a week. But I don't see it as the case anymore because committees have literally just sort of disappeared. I don't even know if there's a finance committee anymore that's not just staff. Used to be community members, bankers, stuff like that. So at the end of the day, it depends on what kind of city structure we have. We really need to get back to committees. Why? Because community members have an issue, they go to the committee. They have an issue with police oversight, they go to committee. They have an issue with a utility bill, they go to the committee. They were heard. Their items were addressed to some degree. When you do away with committees, you do away with communication to the issues. If you were to do a survey today, I can guarantee you that the general public of our community is not happy with the way city government works. But you know what's happened through the years? They tolerate it because nobody listens. That's what their comment is. And mayor and council think, oh, everything's fine. I haven't heard anything. And then when they finally hear that there's a big can of worms, they don't want to get near it. So as mayor, I was almost a full-time mayor. I was I had already sold our propane business, so I was able to be there almost 3/4 time during the week. I didn't want to be in the way of the city manager. Tom Clayton, by fact, was my manager, and I wanted him to run his city. He needed to talk to the department directors. I was there to assist in any way I could, and if something came up that he needed me, I could go and communicate with him. But I was running an autonomous office, not dictating to him what to do. He had to take direction from mayor and council. And I really think it's mayor of council, because they're the ones coming from committees, coming to the work session, telling us, put these items on the agenda and work on it. And we really need, at some point through this whole process, Mr. Chairman, we really need to look at the committee structures, because we need to get all of these departments engaged in decisions for this community again. Does that answer your question, Lee?
It does, and I guess my short response would be, if we're paying somebody $10,000 to work 5 hours a week, I'm fine with that. That's actually not bad, Jack, to sit in a meeting and not do an awful lot else. If you're completely engaged, I can see you being a conscientious city councilor and actually working to draft ordinances and whatnot being a full-time job, and $10,000 isn't much for that.
It's about $4 an hour.
And your point is well taken, both Commissioner Ana and Commissioner Martinez. I think that, yeah, we will get to the committees and commission structure and those bodies, and really kind of to bring it back home. In my conversations with the city manager, I should inform you of that just as an informational piece. I did speak to Dr. Taylor regarding several issues, but the gist being my conversation with Randy Van Vleck of the Municipal League as in regards to who in the state would be the good legal authority or advisor on municipal law. So we talked about that, and I'll talk about that at our next regular meeting. I'll ask Darlene to put that in as an action item or as a discussion item, and I'll have more information by that time. But in speaking with Dr. Taylor, he expressed to me that there was some issues with the mechanics of the city as far as those boards and commissions, and within specific duties as outlined within the charter. And I'm getting ahead of myself here, but those are areas that I think are worth visiting. What we would do as far as recommendations is up to the commission and how we do that. Do we do that as a commission in the charter? Do we strengthen the language to cause revision within committees? There would be minimal language, but would spark and require action. In other words, not take the role on so much ourselves as a commission, but to plant language that would force action by those through the charter. And I think that's what we have to weigh heavily. And those are easy ways for us to get things done without going the long route of revision. And they would be simple revisions or recommendations that maybe take action and actually reflect in the charter as to how things should happen, which is completely different from rewriting and recommending action. So I think that's simplicity. And that's why this charter it's pretty scant. I mean, how many people? We have 31 pages on how to run a city. And really a few words, you provide the framework for how a city should operate. In keeping with the spirit of simplicity, I think we should kind of stick with that when we think about recommendations, in keeping the language as simple as we can so that the revision and the wordsmithing are kept to a minimum, but have generalized impact. I know that's a lot to think about and it's kind of convoluted, but in a way it's simple. With regards to a counsel or an advisor for us, I found that I have the names of 2 people. And I had emailed you all, I think I had phrased you all that we had talked to Randy Van Vleck and another individual who might be available. They're both retired or retiring. So this is an area of law that's kind of going by the wayside, and Matt kind of alluded as to why. We don't see a lot of interaction within the city government and the city and the populace anymore. People have gotten tired of it, or they're not interested, or it seems to be cloaked. I don't know what it is, but maybe that's something we could visit and talk about. But it's something that I've discovered, and Matt, you pointed out to it. You very succinctly, people just aren't engaged. And I don't really see that in the city itself. I've seen a lack of engagement, and perhaps it's because of COVID here at school, at the college, where students aren't engaged. So it's just a generalized kind of malaise, lack of a better term. But perhaps we could visit that in the charter. But I'd like you to, when you think about revisions, to keep the revisions at a minimum and simple so that we can implement them and they would have the greatest impact. And I think that's where a sharp attorney or a counselor would be able to point us in the right direction. With that, I think we could leave compensation then. Was there anything else within the preceding council redistricting? I think that was pretty much fairly simple. I didn't see any major revisions there as to the process of redistricting. The qualifications and elections, if we modify section B of section 2.1, we'll automatically modify section C of section 2.03. Because we'd move those both to 8, if that would be the will of the commission. Council redistricting, it's pretty pro forma. I think it needs very little, in my opinion. And if you have anything on that, Matt, I'm putting you at a disadvantage without your notes again. But then again, we could revisit. I found nothing in section 2.05 vacancy in office. That was pretty standard and it was pretty straightforward. How do you replace somebody if they leave or die? Commissioner Salazar.
I just had a question on 2.05 subsection C. It says the last sentence is, if the office is not filled within 45 days of the vacancy, a special election shall be called to fill the vacancy for the remaining term of office. What I'd like to know is, that's pretty ambiguous. It doesn't really state how long is required to implement that special election. Do they wait months? Do they wait weeks? I was wondering if we could clear that up and get some input from the city clerk to really know how long does it take to set up a special election? Because we don't want these districts to be without representation for too much time.
I believe that by state statute, there's a trigger that if there's a call for a special election, there's a calendar set by state statute in there. I may be wrong, but I can get clarification from the city clerk on that. But I believe that that's defined by statute, that once it's called for, an election calendar comes into play. Now, obviously, the 45-day is kind of a shot across the bow that if you haven't done it in 15 days, we're going to have a special election. So it kind of puts the pressure to fill positions quickly. in the first part of that section. And the second part, well, we're going to have a special election, and then I believe that the special election procedures that are in state statute would come into effect. And there is a section, I don't recall the specific section within state statute that defines special elections. But I can clarify that for our next meeting.
That would be great.
I'll
Thank
have some
you.
clarification on that. And that's section 205, section C, 45 days.
And Mr. Chair, Commissioner Salazar, you bring up a good point, and we actually saw it happen already during this administration, where we had a councilman resign, and then the council had to agree on the mayor's appointment, okay? So it worked. The 45 days with a shot across the bow, like the chairman just talked about, it worked. In 45 days, they figured out a name. They proposed the name to the mayor approved it, and they had their fourth city councilor. If you don't put a deadline, I think this can go on perpetually, and you'll only have, district representative and one without representation, okay? And then when you talk about the calendar, there is a calendar. And it's not just a state calendar. The city clerk has to check with the county clerk that there's no other elections going on. A school board, Luna board, property tax increase for school district. All of those other things have to be considered. How far are we from the general, the primary? Because there's only certain windows that you can use throughout the year to have an election. So it can become very complicated. At the last second, you've got to make the quick decision and say, you've got to get this election done, and it's going to be a 45-day window or whatever the time period is. So it takes a lot. But we already saw it work one time, and it worked well.
Very well. Very good point. Commissioner Einer.
Oh, no, I'm actually going to remain silent. I have nothing here.
Oh, okay.
It can happen. It's just weird.
We'll take note of that, Commissioner. Moving on, and I'll clarify that with the city clerk then. We've gone over compensation, section 2.07, governing body procedures. I did not find anything there that was glaring that we've seen being a problem or needing revision. Anything from the commission?
Yes, actually. So I'm looking at subsection B, and it provides for, and this was a stumbling block during the last administration, it provides for how a special meeting may be called, but it doesn't say how you get anything on the agenda. Which control of the agenda, if it resides solely in mayoral hands, once again makes the mayor the dictator of Las Vegas.
How can we rectify that?
Well, there's two ways. Subsection B could be expanded to indicate how items may be placed on the agenda, or there is a passage in here that indicates that the governing, here it is. The other solution is subsection C. The governing body shall determine its own rules and order of business and shall cause minutes to be kept of all its proceedings. If the governing body will enact an ordinance clarifying how items may be added to the agenda, then there's really no modification needed to the city charter. But one of those two things would be of great benefit.
Bina, wanting to be a devil's advocate, could we not, on line 8, at the beginning of the second sentence, notice of meeting shall be given as provided in a resolution to be adopted by the governing body each year pursuant to the Mexico Meetings Act. Notice of meetings and agendas shall be provided in a resolution to be adopted. We could add the word agenda there, and that would tie it into the notice of meeting. That would be a simple revision, and it would give it when you do it.
I'll just go, Mr. Chairman.
Yes,
What he's talking about is the mayor current structure controls the agenda, okay? And there is a process for 3 of the 4 councilors to place an item on the agenda. If the 3 councilors beg and jump up and down and nothing happens, the mayor is still 100% in control of that agenda, okay? I believe, and I think you're correct, there needs to be a process in writing, or if the majority of the council has an item to be brought before the council, and the mayor doesn't want to abide by that they go back to the charter, and the charter says, if you have a majority of the city council wants an item, whatever it is based on here, but there is a process for that. Now, there was no process when I was mayor, but I told the city councilors, if half of you want an item on the agenda, bring it to me. And that's how we were able to add council items to the agenda. But don't forget, you'll always have one councilor that says, I want this item on the agenda. We'll put it on the agenda. The other councilors don't want to act on it. The votes, 1 in favor and 7 against. But you have to have a process. Is that correct? Is that what you're talking about, Lee? Having a process for the council to have the ability to add an item for action item to the agenda.
That is exactly what I'm talking about. And during the Gurule Giron administration, what happened was they had actually fallen back on an administrative regulation that was drafted by Tim Dodge that gave, I think, the city manager hands-on entire control of the agenda. And not only is that trumped by ordinance, which is in turn trumped by charter, but there's some question as to whether an administrative regulation is even valid after the city manager who enacted it has left. But it was sufficient to have the entire city council treed. I mean, they couldn't get things on the agenda and, unless the mayor wanted that item passed. And that, that's the unitary executive right there. That gets pretty scary. So, yes, and I would say perhaps not even a majority. Why not 2? Because you can get something on an agenda doesn't mean it's going to be enacted. It just means that it's brought forth for public discussion.
Interesting points by Commissioner Martinez and Commissioner Einer. Commissioner Madrid, you had something to say here.
No, I agree. I think if a counselor who represents a certain area of the city has a concern, it should be addressed.
So where would our language then for that be? Would it reside within rules and minutes, or would it reside within meetings?
I think it's a council procedure.
So it would be in rules.
Somewhere where it has a lot of strength.
Well, rules would be a rule would have hierarchy over procedure, but if you list a procedure within rules, it would fall under the rules. So as far as the hierarchy of rulemaking, a procedure would fall under a rule, after a rule. So you want to move it in rules and minutes. So we need defining language there as to the governing body shall determine its own rules and order of business and shall cause minutes to be kept to the proceedings. But if you define it within rules,
I'm going to say there's two answers to this question. And again, if the answer we select is we're going to modify the city charter, so any councilman can bring forth an agenda item, that would fall intuitively in meetings. However, it is rules and minutes that empowers the governing body to establish that same right by ordinance.
Could we, within rules, construct or construct language which would define when a council person could bring forth an agenda item? Not define it by ordinance, but define the process in the charter.
Sure. Why not? I mean, it's these subheadings tend to be for convenience and to identify the subject of well, not discussion, but the subject of the language. But these subheadings don't actually define what the language therein means or how it's to be interpreted. So it could be under meetings, it could be under rules and minutes. If we scroll down, it could be subparagraph G.
Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead.
Just to add to the discussion in regards to I think one of the most important issues is literally because of the lack of that wording not being in any place, okay? And the fact that the 3 city councilors during the last administration are not able to place an item on the agenda that probably would have changed the whole outlook of the community. They never even took it to court, and by the time that they actually finally landed up making it a legal thing, a year down the road, it was down the road. And imagine that because there was no process for the majority of the council to place an item on the agenda, literally one mayor superseded the work of all 4. In other words, it shut it down. And there was a majority that was going to support the item on the agenda, and it didn't happen because the mayor wouldn't place that item on the agenda, and she was not going to do it, and that was all there is to it. And really, the majority of the council, don't forget, has the stroke. She shut them down, and they should have taken it to court and had that item gone through the process. And I'll guarantee you, they would have liked the opinion, because there's no way you can keep the majority of the council away from making the decision it needs to make. And you know what I'm talking about, Lee. You saw that happen. She literally intimidated the majority of the council.
Yeah, absolutely.
In my viewing and looking at the general table of contents, I think we're right that the only place we could do this would be within this particular section of the charter, and there's no other area of the charter that would address meetings and the process for meetings. And I think in reviewing this, it would more be aptly housed within subsection B in the definition of meetings and the procedures within those meetings. Because you're defining special meetings may be held on the call of the mayor, so there's how you do a special. There's notice within there. Except as provided by the New Mexico, all meetings of the quorum of the shall be open to the public. Somewhere, and I would say right after special meeting, or after notice, we should address agenda. So right after pursuant to the New Mexico Open Meetings Act, and that sentence on line 9, we should insert a sentence there that would say that the agenda may be set by X number of, brought forth by X number of councilmen.
Mr. Chair,
Prescribing a minimum number. Go ahead.
I just shared draft language on chat that may work if you want to take a look at that.
And Lee, Mr. Chair, Lee, I sort of saw it. I don't know how to get it back on my screen. I'll keep looking for it, but nonetheless, it's not about the entire agenda because it's still the mayor and manager's document that's presented to the city council. You want to change that. You want to be able to bring up an item on the agenda. It's the whole thing about an item.
So the language that Commissioner Einer has proposed, now let me read it to you. Any councilor, any councilor may, by submission in writing at least 5 days prior to a meeting, submit an item to the city clerk, who will cause that item to be placed on the agenda, period. So it's affording any councilor to have the right to place an item on the agenda.
I think Commissioner Salazar has something.
No, I was just scratching my head right away.
Oh. In regards to that, the clerk really doesn't have nothing to do with the agenda until the agenda needs to be published. So really the agenda is placed, literally the way the process worked with me was the city manager with input from all the directors would start working on the agenda. And then the mayor would approve the agenda. And then when it's approved, all supporting documentations would be given to the clerk. And that's the only place. So it doesn't go to the clerk, Lee, it goes to the city manager.
So would we specify then and take out clerk, the item to the city clerk, and say the item to the city manager or the city manager's office? You have to hand it to the city manager.
I'd say city manager, that's the process. No matter what the city manager puts together, the mayor has to approve it.
So we would add that as a separate sentence on line 9 after Open Meetings Act, period.
Okay. Now, Matt, when you say the mayor has to approve it, does that give the mayor veto power over an agenda item?
Literally, today, the mayor can veto all of it.
Is that written in the charter somewhere?
If the mayor doesn't want to have an item on the agenda, you can have a meeting, roll call for the agenda, and it's over. There's no need. Really, at the end of the day, the mayor council manager form of government gives the mayor the authority to approve the agenda and can do so up until the time of the meeting. He can remove an item at the last second. Or she can. I can't say he anymore because it was he back when I was there, but it's he or she anymore.
And where is that to be found in statute or regulation or charter?
I would imagine that's probably state law because I don't think our
In
charter
review
covers
of Article 3 of the charter and the duties of the mayor, the powers and duties, section 3.02, which defines the powers of the mayor, there's literally approval of city manager, represent the city, represent some. It's not contained in the powers and duties of the mayor in the charter. Not that I see. In looking at the rest of section 2 of Article 2, There's nothing in the rest of section 2.8 in ordinances. And so really that might be in administrative law in the statutes. I'll have to research that. Let me research the powers of the mayor for setting the agenda.
Okay, just a
And
minute.
don't forget to check state law, Francisco,
I'll
because
look at the statutes.
I'm almost done.
that's where I think it came from.
NMSA, okay, I'll look through state statutes and I'll look through administrative law
Get Mr.
that it
Bernardo.
refers to, and any foot, I'll do a little shepherdizing there and see if we can find it. Let me look at that. That's an interesting thing because it's not defined in the rules. It's not defined in the charter per se. So do we know when the city councilors that challenged that, where were they basing, do anybody know where they were basing their challenge from? Is there a particular statute? Was there a particular rule of law? Was it just an administrative rule? Maybe I can ask one of the counselors. Let me ask one of the counselors that was bringing that forward. And perhaps we can get some input there. Any ideas on that?
I don't know. I think Councilman Romero might be a good resource for that. If I recall, he was the name on the suit.
And I think Barbara, Councilor Casey was there too.
Yeah, that's what I'll ask both. I'll ask both of them and see if they can recall where they were basing their action on and what particular statute or what particular rule.
Chairman, I'm sorry, I have to leave. My grandbaby just woke up, and so I need to.
Oh well, let me do this. We've now approaching 3:30, and the meeting today was set from 1:30 to 3:30. I think that we have had a good meeting and healthy discussions today. I think we accomplished a lot. Thank you all. Because of the time restrictions and the Open Meeting Act restrictions on time, I think we've reached our conclusion today. Can I have a motion to adjourn and continue at the next regular meeting?
Mr. Chair, before you finish, my license change for next month's meeting on May the 6th. I will not be able to attend that because I have a Hispanic Cultural Center meeting and I'm the chair of that committee, and that came up because we have a new interim director. So I can't do that one. So if we could change our meeting a day before or day after, it's fine. We can do it at the same time.
Let me do this. I know that we have our regular meeting scheduled. Let me see. I don't know if, let me consult with Darlene on that. If we could change the meeting date, we'll go ahead and do it. If not, we'll keep it, but we'll add another special meeting to continue. How's that?
Sounds good.
That's fine.
Can I have a motion for adjournment?
I
I
motion to
move we
adjourn.
adjourn.
Do I have a second?
I beat you, Lee.
I second.
Not a race here. We have a motion and a second for adjournment. All those in favor, say aye.
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 Opposed, sign. Thank you very much. This is a very productive meeting. I want to thank you all, commissioners. We did a lot today.
Thank you, gentlemen. Have a good
Thanks.
month.
We'll see you.
Have a good afternoon. Darlene, if you could stay on for a second.
Okay. Hita.
I'm here, sir.
I hope you got everything today.
I did.
It wasn't productive to me. It was interesting.
It was.
Darlene, with regards to regular meetings, I know we have our regular meetings pre-advertised, and Matt asked if we could move that. I don't know what the process is there. Or should we just, I could suggested just conducting a regular meeting and have another special.
I would, whatever you want to do, but that sounds like a better plan to just keep your regular and then maybe add another special.
Okay.
Yeah, we can do what we did in the case of Commissioner Ludi today, if we have any action, we can defer it and table it till next meeting where they're there.
Okay,
That way they don't miss out on any particular discussion. I want to make sure we include all of our members. It was a good lively discussions today.
yes.
Lot of stuff. And thank Cassandra for attending. Again, I think that she added a lot to it, and I think she appreciates you including her in the process.
Yes, I certainly will. Yes.
And thank you, as always, you do a fantastic job.
Well, thank you.
Keep it up and I'll keep patting your back.
Thanks.
Okay, you have a great afternoon.
Okay, you too. Have a good one.
Come on into the meeting. My niece just woke up. Oh, it's cold.